Well, good afternoon, everybody. Wow, I don't think that's ever happened to me before. Actually, people respond back. Great audience. Before I start, I'd like to just get a quick snapshot, just so that I'm not making any preconceived ideas as to what this audience is supposed to be about. Let me get a quick understanding of who you are as a group. Write down one of the following symbols for me, if you don't mind. Just on a piece of paper in front of you, either a circle, a triangle, a square, or a Z. Z, triangle, square, or a circle. Next time we do this, we'll have some sort of Jeopardy music playing in the background. For those of you who haven't been able to figure out what to write down yet, that says something about you as well. Okay, you got it? Great. Circles, raise your hand. Holy cow. Okay, not a surprise. Many general managers, in fact, a lot of general managers happen to be circles. The reason is because circles tend to be very out-of-the-box thinkers, more generalists, often come from a sales or marketing background. Unfortunately, for you, Bill, a particularly undisciplined lot of people. Don't know if you identify with that or not. How about the squares? Raise your hand. Okay, let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, that's okay. You've got 6 accountants in the room. It's not a bad thing. In fact, you circles out there, find one of those squares instantly. Those are the individuals who aren't constrained by process, that embrace methodology, individuals who actually thrive with some form of discipline in their lives. Congratulations. In rare demand here. Again, Bill, you've got a problem. Now, how about the triangles? Raise your hand. Oh, interesting. Okay, keep your hands up. Anybody sitting next to a triangle? Just be careful. Triangles. See, that's a triangle. What's your name, sir? Brian. Brian won't keep his hand down. He's like, yeah, that's me, I'm a triangle. He doesn't even know why, but he's keeping up. You know why? Because triangles will do anything to get to the top of an organization as quickly as possible. They are the absolute hardest driving individuals, the most ambitious, ruthless individuals in this room. Just be careful. Now, the Z's are an interesting lot. Z's are a very, oh my gosh, he even raised a hand. See, I didn't ask anybody to raise their hand. And the reason is because I didn't want to embarrass anybody. What's your name, sir? What is it? T.Y. See, I didn't want to embarrass people like T.Y. Because from what we can tell, Z's, they're just preoccupied with booze and sex. No socially redeeming value from what we can tell. But a heck of a lot of fun at the cocktail reception after this particular event. No, I'm just kidding. These are the individuals who are folks that say, listen, all these other geometric shapes, forget it. I'm about as conformist as you can possibly get. Absolutely not. I'm going to choose something totally out of the ordinary. So, now that I've actually typified exactly what is in this room, by the way, anybody want to change to become a Z? Raise your hand. Yeah. Okay. We're going to deal with 3 basic messages today around leadership, and one of them, and probably the theme that we're going to draw through the entire session, is really a very simple premise. And the premise is this: that relationships are the core to our success. That's really it. Relationships are the core to our success. And that's not only true for you as leaders, but it's just generally true in life. But I think you know that, or you wouldn't be in this room. I mean, I doubt very much that any of you, in reflecting back on the success that you have had as individuals in your career as leaders, and frankly, your success in general, thinking about the most wonderful achievement that you have gained or achieved in life, you can start popping up and seeing the faces and the names of all those wonderful people that were there to help you be a success. The team members, the coaches, the peers, the significant others, the families, etc. And if relationships are the core to our success, let me just start asking the question, what are some of the things that form the core of great, good, solid business relationships? Let me hear some of the words coming from the audience, if you don't mind. Trust, my God, that was overwhelming, fantastic. Trust, great. Respect, fantastic. Honesty, good. Integrity, great. Communication, solid. Couple more. Commitment, perfect. Consistency. Okay, we're going to park those words over here, okay? Now let me come over here for a second. Let's leave business relationships behind for a second. Now let me ask you, what are the kind of words that you'd use and associate with the wonderful relationships of our lives that are the significant others and the best friends? And those individuals, let's assume those words are true, okay? You're going to add to those words: consistency, solid, honest, integrity, commitment, etc. What are the words you'd add over here? Give me some words. Concern. You have teenagers? Yeah. I understand. Okay. Some of the other words. Intimacy. Fantastic. Yes. Caring. Wonderful. Why is it that the women were the two that came up with intimacy and caring, guys? Come on. This is a team sport here. What about some of the others? Patience. Good. You're married, aren't you? Yeah. That's so. Fun. Good. How many people are married, actually? Oh, see, that explains it. I was just wondering why the word passion hadn't come up yet. Come on. Fun, passionate, excitement. These are some of the words that we associate with the intimate, thank you, the intimate relationships of our lives. Now, you might see it coming, but the thing that I'd like to suggest is we as individuals create this artificial construct in our business environment that somehow thinks that these relationships, these business relationships, are different in some way than these relationships. When in actuality, that's just not true. In actuality, the relationships in our lives are just relationships. And we as individuals, for some reason or another, often choose to draw a line and just choose not to step over that line for whatever reason. But what I'm arguing is that the times we do step over the line, the times where we do bring business relationships that look and feel more like those, I would argue are the times that if we look back, those are the times when we've had the most success. Those, yes, sir?
Do you see a geographic difference?
Oh, that's a great question. The question is, do you see a geographic difference? And we, for instance, we have trained almost all of the sales force of Siemens Corporation. We have trained almost all of the sales force of Hewlett-Packard in Asia Pacific. I mean, we're talking about organizations, oh, I know, I understand, sorry about that. All over the world, organizations like Oracle and others. I mean, we're out there a lot. And here's an observation, and this is a great point because we're going to get to this through the construct of the talk. I fundamentally believe absolutely how you approach relationships, the word is approach, how you approach relationships is fundamentally different in different organizations, in different cultures, with different sexes. There's so many different constructs of how you approach relationships. But here's what I would also argue. What we have found is that once you have a relationship, the approach is beyond, and now you're into some form of a relationship where trust is established, it's all the same. The intimacy levels, the intimate relationships in our lives, what we all long for as humans, the human construct is similar. And yes, it's different from one culture to another how you approach and dance into that relationship. But once you have it, I think this is a very global organization, and I've been a part, personally, Deloitte Consulting. I was the Chief Marketing Officer at Deloitte, and I was Chief Marketing Officer worldwide of Starwood Hotels. I spent a lot of time internationally. And I understand that the dances are different, but the intimacy is similar. And that's what we're talking about. Thank you for that question. And that's what we're talking about here. My point, though, is that I personally have found over time, and through our research what we found, is why not try to merge these relationships, types, closer to each other? Because frankly, how many of you in here have had friends that you've worked with? Raise your hand. Right, except for this guy. He's like, no, you don't understand who I work with. Of course you have. Some of you have had best friends that you've worked with. How many bosses have you had over time? And you don't have to raise your hand on this one, but how many bosses have you had over time? Nick's gone, right? All right. Who, frankly, were like fathers and mothers to you, like family. You know, how many employees did you have who you adopted under your wing because you intimately cared about that individual? And that's what we're talking about. I mean, there are people in your organization. I did some research. We did a lot of phone calls and stuff in preparation. And I heard of a couple of the names. A guy named Mike Desens. I don't know if Mike's in here from the eServer Group. How about Terry Pensuck? Is Terry in here from the 300 millimeter manufacturing group? Terry in there. John Waite, microelectronics supply chain. Is John in here? Raise your hand, John. If not, these guys really suck at it. I'm just kidding. These are the guys that people have said they get it. They understand what it's like to build intimacy in an organization, care, relationships. This guy's sitting there thinking, are you kidding me? That's me? But the point is that we all, I think, know what that feels like. Because I personally, you know what it's like. How many people in here are in sales? Raise your hand. Okay. That was kind of the answer that I wanted, but let me push it again. First of all, we're all in sales, right? I guarantee you, every one of us in this room are in sales. But for those of us who ever called on clients, as I have, in many different constructs, you recognize what it's like to come up against a client or a customer who is braced against the desk, prepared for your sale. All right? It's happening. You've all been there. Some of you have been there. It really, talk about sucks. That sucks. Okay? On the other hand, you know what it's like over here when you've got a friend who's a client. Somebody you can pick up the phone on a Friday and say, hey, listen, I got to tell you something. I really screwed up today. My wife's giving me a particularly tough time, or my husband, and is giving me a particularly tough time. I was supposed to be at my kids' play today, and I got into work, and just all heck's breaking loose. You mind if, here's my cell phone. We've never done this before, but could you call me over the weekend, or can we talk about this later? I've really got to bag out on this call today. And that's okay. And that's okay. We know what those environments are like from a customer perspective. And we also know what it's like to have a similar construct or a conversation with our bosses or our employees. I don't know about you. I want to live in this world. Now, not in every relationship. I'm not being idealistic. Not every relationship can be that world. But I promise you, every one of you in this room can move more of your relationships inside of this company and outside of your company just one step closer over here. I promise you can. We all know we can. Is it laziness? Is it fear? Is it intimidation? Is it all those things that are stopping us? But I want to give you a little bit of a formula to help you start having fun and moving more. And by the way, it just brings more joy in our lives. We all work way too many hours to have too much of that atmosphere alone in it. I promise you, I don't know about you, but I truly feel we all work too many hours to have just this atmosphere in our lives. We want more of this. We want more of this. So here are a couple things to think about. And yes, we want more of that for joy. And I forgot that I was supposed to say, and it decreases turnover rate, and it increases productivity, and it increases customer loyalty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 100% correct. We all know that. But it also, for you. Okay, so let's start with understanding what does intimacy really mean. At the very pinnacle of a great relationship with your employees, et cetera, at the very pinnacle of it is something that I would call just deep mutual understanding. We all thrive for that. I think it's one of the greatest human constructs is to have two individuals feel like you totally understand each other. You get each other. Now, most of us live most of our lives in the whole, dating and marriage process, aspiring to have a single significant other who is your soulmate that truly, deeply understands each other. Most of us would say there are fewer than 3 people that truly, deeply understand us as individuals. A lot of people in this room would say that nobody deeply understands you. And by the way, those of you who are saying that, time for therapy. Not a problem. No, and I mean that in all sincerity. No, not a problem in that most people, though, who would say nobody understands me, haven't taken the time to understand themselves. They haven't really become introspective enough to understand what really makes them tick. And they're confused and spiraling in the issue. So if you're one of those individuals, note to self, shrink appointment. Okay, good. But let's just talk about that deep mutual understanding. It doesn't start with small talk. And what I'd love to do is try to use this conference. Is this the first day of a conference? Is there another tomorrow? Okay, good. So you got another 24 hours of this stuff. Let's try to practice it here as best we can. Let's get some practice and some legs on in some of these principles before we take them back into our organizations. One of the things I'd ask you to do is just ban small talk from the hallways. Nobody gives a damn how long you've been with the firm, all right? Nobody cares what division you're in IBM. Because those conversations are the kind of conversations that will start to be had, and all of a sudden, your mind just switches off. It starts going in one ear, coming in out the other, and within 5 seconds, maybe as late as a minute, you've totally forgotten the name of the person. Thank God for the name tags. You've totally forgotten the name of the person you're talking to in front of you. Why? Because you don't care. No expectation that this person is going to be a human or that this relationship is going to last anywhere beyond this mundane small talk. You've just tuned yourself out. On the other hand, if you take it upon yourself to force conversations into the zone of reality, into the zone of humanity, into the zone of the stuff that matters, no more talking about small talk. The basic conversation all of you should have, let's start with talking about the stuff you're passionate about. What are you passionate about? You know, is it your kids, except for the teenagers or 2-year-olds? You know, is it the job that you've got? Is it the excitement you have about what you're about to go back and do? The stuff that we're passionate, just saying to somebody, in the last week, what's the most exciting thing that happened to you? Now, for the Z here, you don't want to share that with anybody, okay? just a word of advice. You know, what's the most exciting stuff that you got going? What are you really passionate about? You know, I don't know if you get it already from me, but I got to tell you, I am passionate and excited about what I do. The mission statement of our company is that business is human and that relationships power growth, both growth for ourselves as individuals and also growth of our companies, whether that's growth relationships with clients and prospects or your people. And I love the fact that I get blessed, truly blessed, with an opportunity to come and speak to people who are shaping the world like you do, shaping, you know, the organizations that shape America and the world, and make some little impact. If some small set of you decide, heck, I'm going to take one step further in this direction, heck of a lot better for me than when the day I was putting butts in beds at Starwood Hotels. I'm loving what I do. I'm passionate about it. What are you passionate about? Now, I'm actually going to give you a chance to practice some of this stuff, and plus you need to stretch your legs. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to stand up, and I'd like you to find somebody that you haven't met yet, or at least you don't know that well, and just talk. I don't want anybody to introduce themselves. You don't care about the division. I don't want you to know how many years you've been here. I just want you to talk about what are you passionate about. Spend 2 minutes having that conversation. Go ahead.
HR leader here.
Oh, great.
Maria Verini, I know you've talked to her a couple times.
She's been fantastic.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Do you have a card on you?
Thank you. Yeah.
So you're Bill's HR guy?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, thanks a lot, Phil. I appreciate the ability to be here.
No, this is very helpful. Even if you don't do anything else, it's good.
Thank you very much. Guys, go ahead and give me a mic. Give me a mic. Because my objective and mission in life is to move more of American business in that direction. All right? Give me a mic, guys. Okay, guys, go ahead and wrap that up. Take about 15 seconds, 30 seconds at the most to wrap that up, please.
Can we change from a triangle to something else?
You want to be the Z.
Very good. Very
Thank
good.
you, sir. What's your name?
BJ Lund. How are you?
BJ, where do you work?
Hardware development Poughkeepsie.
Oh, that's great.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
So you were the chief marketing officer. That's wonderful.
At Starwood and at Deloitte. Yeah. Thanks, BJ. All right, come on back. Come on back. Okay. Come on back. Pretty please. All right. Okay, so that, first of all, I'm excited by the energy. I think that if all we did today is don't get any further beyond this, I think we're doing okay. Because what you've just done is, I think you've set, or at least please try to set this as the base case for what the communication can be like here at this conference going on. All right? I mean, the level of intimacy, the level of candor, the level of levity, you know, the level of enjoyment that you just experienced with another individual is so much better than the typical mundane garbage that's talked about at coffee hours and breaks, etc. You've just proven you do not need 3 scotches to get to this, okay? Imagine what 3 scotches would do now. I mean, fantastic. Okay. So this is only step 1, all right? There's 2 more to come. This is step 1. Step 2 is, and by the way, everything that I'm saying, think about just one moment and think about how you can translate this into your next customer interaction. Think about how you can translate this into your next interaction with your own folks. Think about your next staff meeting when you go back to the office, okay? Think about how you can reintroduce humanity into you, you know, or into us as leaders. And deep mutual understanding, being the pinnacle, is really another word for empathy. It's another word for intimacy. And that kind of empathy is critical. It's critical to us as leaders. Before an individual is going to look to us, respect us, accept what we're telling them to do or to behave, there's got to be empathy and trust up as well. So as Nick was saying, make sure you're managing down. This is how we got to be in order to effectively manage down. Okay, so that's number 1, is the passion. Number 2, sharing your dreams and your aspirations. Now, we have a little thing that we do in our staff meetings, and we work with this construct called an accountability group, basically teaching how you bring these concepts into staff meetings. Because sometimes you need to create process around some of these things. And one way is you can actually have a part of the annual planning process where you're sitting with an employee. And I'm not sure how this fits into the typical HR constructs, but I'm going to save some time for Q&A at the end. We can talk about how this integrates. But asking somebody the question, what are your dreams? What do you really want to do? Where do you really want to go? And I'm not talking about next quarter. I'm not talking about the next job that you want to have. That's always a part of what but I'm really talking about what your dreams are. I've got a woman in my organization who runs sales support. Her job is to really be maintaining the pipeline and making sure our CRM system is clicking along and disciplining people when they're stepping outside, etc. And she wants to be a lawyer. That's what she wants to be. And I know that, and I understand it, and I know that we're going to invest in her to make sure that she gets her law degree, and she'll probably leave. But that's fine. I got to tell you something. I don't know how long it'll take between now and with night school and all the other things, but she's going to be an amazing employee between now and when she leaves. And when she leaves, the way I think about it is, I will graduate her from Farazi Greenlight into the rest of the world. And who knows where she'll end up or the kind of goodwill that will ultimately come back, but that doesn't matter. It's the right thing to do, and it's going to happen anyway. So let's invest in those conversations. Let's understand what people's dreams are. Let's understand what their aspirations are. But by the way, by doing that, it's our only chance of holding on to them anyway. Because maybe there's a way through transparency and openness with these individuals that they'll tell us something that'll click. They'll tell us something that makes us think, you know what, I need to go have a conversation with the head of HR. And with that conversation, maybe think of another way that we can utilize this talent if they're particularly high talent. Open up that dialogue. Now, this is a leadership conference, and I'm not going to use this as an opportunity for you to share your dreams and aspirations of leaving in the next quarter with the people around you, or whatever they happen to be. But what I thought I would do is I would say, let's make an assumption that as all great leaders, we all assume that we want to get better as leaders. And by the way, one of the things we've seen consistently, one of my next books is going to be on the subject of the common belief systems of great leaders. And we've been doing a lot of research around what those belief systems are. And one of the great inherent belief systems of great leaders is the aspiration of continuous personal growth. It's amazing. When we talk to people who've been great leaders, they consistently say to themselves, you know, I may be getting a lot of credit, but I'm not nearly as good as I want to be. The aspiration of consistent growth as individuals tends to be one of the #1 attributes of great leaders once they're pointed to. And by the way, what we find is the people who are really crappy leaders are the ones they think that they're great. So that's just something to think about. So one of the things that I'd like you to ask yourself, and maybe even take a moment and just write it down on a piece of paper. Think of 2 individuals in your lives that have had a real impact on your aspiration of what a great leader is. Think of 2 individuals, or even maybe it's 1 individual, but 2 attributes of great attributes of a leader that you'd like to adapt, to adopt, to bring into yourself. I mean, I think about Pat LeConto. Pat LeConto was the CEO of Deloitte Consulting when I was just a kid coming up in the firm, and ultimately was my boss when I became Chief Marketing Officer and on the board there. And I'll tell you about something about Pat. #1, Pat cared about me. God, he cared about me. You know, when I left the firm, I actually shed tears thinking about telling Pat that I was leaving. He was like a dad to me. He brought me up through the organization. Now, Pat was also a bully, you know. I mean, his leadership style was gruff, and for whatever reason, he loved intimidating. Doesn't mean that he wasn't a great, caring individual. Not every leader that we look to is going to be perfect. We're never going to be perfect. So I'm not saying that you find the perfect leader. Just find the attributes of the leader that you really admire and try to bring those attributes into yourself. It's like a puzzle, you know? The other one is J.B. Bartels. He was the president of Starwood when I was there. J.B. gave me the most direct, consistent feedback that you could ever imagine. He was one of the most direct individuals. He's German. One of the most direct. I'm not sure that had anything to do with it. He was one of the most direct individual. But you know what? He did it in a way that was never shaming. I never felt ashamed. But I accepted and he would pull stuff out that, frankly, I would avoid. I mean, the kind of stuff that makes me squirm as a leader to talk to somebody about, he would just, boom, hit me right in the square in the eyes with it. A great attribute that I admire. Think about a couple of the attributes. And I'm just going to pause for a moment, even take just 30 seconds. Write them down right now. Think of 2 attributes that you find, having been exposed to great leaders in your lives, that you admire. Go ahead and write those down. Okay. By the way, going back to the point about Pat, the fact that he cared about me deeply as an individual, about my life goals. I remember when I left, I ultimately got up with enough gumption and went and talked to him. He turned to me and he said, listen, Keith, the only advice that I have for you, and of course I don't want you to leave, and I think it's a bad move and all these other things, but the only advice I have for you is never look back. I mean, it was exactly the kind of advice I would have expected from Pat because of how much he cared about me, and he divorced this concept of me as an employee. I mean, it was about me as a person, and I thought that was fantastic. What I get from that, by the way, is one of the second attributes of great relationships, and it's about generosity. It's really about generosity. The people in this world who try to work hard to make other people successful are the kind of people that have the richness and the wonderful relationships over here. Whether that's your bosses, obviously it's easy to manage up and make your bosses successful. You think that there's a reward for that. But those of us who recognize that making our people successful, I know it sounds trite. It sounds like something that's all Pollyannish. But I promise you, there's a good chunk of folks in here that don't do it. I'll explain myself that I haven't done it all the time either. And we have to keep reminding ourselves, making our people successful makes us successful and also allows us to live in that more joy-filled environment. So what I'd like you to do is find somebody else, somebody you haven't met yet, and I just want you to go and spend the same kind of time, but just talk about those attributes of that great leader that you aspire to emulate. Just share a couple of those attributes. Maybe there are some war stories about that individual, etc. Go have that conversation. Go for it.
People laughing?
Yeah.
Sorry.
You like the new content? You get a chance to listen to it?
I was listening to all of it for the last 5 minutes. That's unbelievable. I haven't hiked into Bill's office.
Hey, can I get a copy of this tape too? Thank you. All right, take about 30 seconds and wrap that up. About 30 seconds. Come on back. Come on back. I've lost total control of this audience. Which is a good, that's a good sign. I hate podiums. Actually, you know what? Podiums, they feel very safe. I kind of like it back here now. All right. Okay. So you know what? I hope that was interesting. I hope to go from, sharing your passions and the livelihood that you had there to the next stage, which is willingness to talk to somebody else and talk about some of your aspirations, some of the things you'd like to bring into your life, and some of the, maybe even started sharing some of the stories, the human stories of those great leaders that you've had and that have been meaningful to you. I think that's great. There's a next level, though. There's a next level. And it's not just sharing all the happy stuff in our lives, not just sharing all the positive stuff in our lives, but be willing to be truly human, to be willing to lower your guard a little bit. How many of you in here know somebody that you would have liked to have gotten to know better, but for whatever reason, that individual just had this wall around them and you just couldn't get through? How many of you ever known such a person? Raise your hand. Yeah. How many of you are married to that person? Yeah. I used to be. Here's the advice, if I could be so precocious to give you advice. Here's the advice. Don't be that person. I guarantee all of us, there are people on our organizations who think we're that person. We know what that feels like. We know what it's like to want to need to aspire to, get closer to another individual. But that last mile of intimacy, that last sense of humanity and closeness, you just can't break through that person's shell. We shouldn't be that as leaders. If you're going to reach down, as Nick suggested, if you're going to bring people into you and allow you to be candid and to some sense even foster confrontation that's healthy in the organization, you've got to create, and it's your obligation, a fertile environment around yourself that welcomes people in to be fully themselves, to be flawed, and to be vulnerable as we all are. If our people can't be vulnerable in our organizations, they're not going to be effective. We are not going to be effective at giving them the kind of counsel that we need to give them if we're unapproachable. If we pretend, because we know that we're not perfect, but if we pretend that we are, we're not going to be approachable to be able to coach folks. There's two introductions I could give of myself. One of them I've already even caught to some extent myself giving, but it goes something like this. Hi, I'm Keith Ferrazzi, Yale undergrad, Harvard Business School, youngest chief marketing officer in the Fortune 500 when I was at Deloitte Consulting. In fact, youngest partner ever elected at Deloitte. I went on to become the youngest officer in the Fortune 500 altogether when I was at Starwood Hotels. I then left, started a company with Michael Milken in the computer games business. We successfully sold that about 4 or 5 years ago. I started Farazi Greenlight. I published a book. It's now a best-selling book in the New York Times called Never Eat Alone and Other Secrets to Success. And I commute back and forth between New York and Los Angeles. I'm on the Today Show about once a month. Nice to meet you. Now, many of you are sitting out there thinking, asshole. It used to be that introduction was the introduction that I worked so hard at getting out within 5 minutes in some form or fashion of a conversation with somebody. And why do you think I was rushing so fast to put that introduction out in little snippets or whatever? Anybody have any ideas?
Insecurity.
You got it, across the board, insecurity. Now, there is another introduction that I can give that I've become much more comfortable over time being able to give. And it goes something like this. My name's Keith Farazi. I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania. I don't know, is there anybody in here from Pittsburgh originally? Super Bowl? Yes? No? Yes? Yes, I hope. It's about time. No. My dad was a steel worker, and my mom was a cleaning lady. And Dad and Mom, my mom didn't even have a high school degree. Dad only had a high school degree before he went to World War II. And yet they both had a commitment that their son was going to get a great education. And they busted their butts to make sure that happened. In fact, Dad got me into, it's a great story I tell in the book, Dad got me into one of the most prestigious small elementary schools called Valley School of Ligonier. Literally 8 kids in all of 5th grade. 8 kids in all of 5th grade. And it was a school that was built on the Mellon Estate. So the kids would come driving up in their Lincoln Town cars and their Cadillacs, driven by sometimes my mom, who was actually a cleaning lady for some of my classmates, families, which wasn't always easy to deal with. And they'd come up, and we'd be like chugging up in our beat-up green Nova with like rust spots, right? And I remember there was a time we used to buy our clothes. I mean, the school uniform you buy at Brooks Brothers, okay, for this school, literally. And we couldn't obviously afford that, so we would go to the local Nearly New shop, which is like a Salvation Army. It was called Nearly New. And we knew that older kids, when they outgrew their jackets, parents would end up taking them to this place. So I'd go shopping, and I would remember hiding in the aisles of clothes as a little kid for fear that one of my friends would come in with their mom dropping off clothes. And that was like my biggest fear, that people would find out that I had to shop at the Nearly New shop. And of course, Connie Semler. Everybody knows a Connie Semler in 5th grade. So Connie Semler found Armour Mellon, it was Prosser's son, his name written in the back of my jacket, because Armour was 2 classes above me, and apparently we had bought a jacket that Armour previously owned. She found that jacket, found that name, and announced to everybody in the 5th grade class that I was buying my clothes at the Nearly New shop. Devastated, I mean, as you could imagine. The good news is that I got to tell that story in my book about Connie Semler. Just as an idea, the little joys of authorship. I just throw that out there. Look, what did all that do for me? The number one thing that it did is it just made me hate rich kids. No, I'm just kidding. The number one thing that it did for me is it gave me a palpable drive and ambition that was off the charts. I mean, it was amazing. One of the things we're working on right now in our foundation, because we're taking all this stuff, these life skill sets, talk about education. I don't believe this stuff is taught as it should be at the college level. I don't think the stuff we're talking about is taught in the MBA programs. We'll have trained 15,000 MBAs this last year. 15,000 MBAs. And now I'm taking this and I'm driving it down into the colleges. We're working with Duke. We're working with Harvard. We're working with Yale, Vanderbilt. But I want every school to have access to this kind of life skills training so that we don't screw it up like I did and stumble into this stuff, and it takes me 30 years until I can write a book until I start figuring this stuff out. I want to have this stuff brought into our lives earlier so we can have more of this happiness and jettison some of this insecurity that screwed me up as a younger person. Anyway, I'm sorry. Most of you are thinking, he needs therapy. Had plenty, don't worry. So the key, though, into this next stage is, how was I dealing with this stuff? Palpable drive and ambition, huge insecurity. Huge insecurity. I didn't feel like I was as good as the rich kids. And that brought in me a couple of assumptions. The first of all was an assumption of struggle. I got really good at struggling. I had a belief in scarcity. Some of that scarcity I believed in early on was the scarcity of relationships. I believed that relationships were as scarce as all of the other resources that were out there. Now, what happens? And by the way, let me tell you a little story about my mom. We've all got mom stories. My mom is amazing. She's still alive. We're closer than ever. But, like everybody else, we do our best. And Mom was never particularly good at hearing feedback. So, I would express as a kid my whatever, and she would flip out. Anything that I would, ask, question, whatever, her reaction, flip out. So there was another belief system that got ingrained in me as a kid. And that belief system was in the fragility of others. I believed that if you expressed discontent, people were going to flip out, So here's two things that I had going on in my life. I believed in the fragility of others, meaning if I said to somebody, you disappoint me, they'd go running away. In the same regard, I believed in the scarcity of relationships, meaning that I would look at somebody and I would lose that relationship and I'd be afraid I couldn't replace that relationship. I believed in the scarcity of relationships. Those two belief systems created a behavior in me called conflict avoidance. I would avoid conflict because I was afraid that if I confronted somebody, they would either shrivel up and die or run away, and I'd never be able to replace that relationship. We all have belief systems that engender behaviors. The good news is, don't worry about where the belief systems come from. Don't even worry about the belief systems. Focus on the behaviors. The same regard is we all have familiar behaviors. Every one of us in this room have familiar behaviors that get in our way of success. It's easy, by the way, to recognize when our employees have those familiar behaviors that get in their way of success. We're sitting there, we scratch our head, we're like, why does this Dick or Jane over there, why do they do that all the time? They got to see what they're doing. Well, you know what? Sometimes they do see it, but it's just a compulsion. They can't stop. It's a familiar behavior that for whatever reason as children served them well, and they were victim as kids, but they're volunteers today. They've got to identify those behaviors that are getting in their way of success as leaders and change them. We all have them. And they create things like, micromanagement as a behavior we'd like to get rid of. They create things like incapability of tough talk. Pleasing behaviors are some things that some of us have. Bullying, as I mentioned earlier. There's all of these different things, tempers, all of these different things that we do. And guess what? It's okay. They're natural. We all have them. There's not a single employee that you have that doesn't have some of them. There's not a single person in this room that doesn't have some level or degree and need for improvement around some of these behaviors. Maybe not all of them are as pathological as mine, but, heck, they're out there. The key for all of us, as I mentioned earlier, the key success factor of a great leader is willingness and desire for personal growth. If you're all willing in this room to accept the fact that you want to grow and get better as individuals and as leaders, then the first step you're going to have to do is you're going to have to diagnose what it is that you're going to start working on. What is it that you want to change in the coming year about your leadership? It could be small. It could be a little bit. It could be listening a little bit more. It could be candor. I got to tell you, I've been reading a little bit about something called a pension fund. I think that's going to require some candid talk, and I think it's going to require some listening. If those are two things that you might want to get a little bit better at, now it's time to start. Because you're going to have a lot of conversations in the near term. What are those things? Empathy, compassion are two other things that I think would be quite useful right now in your environment. By the way, you ain't got nothing going on. I'm going to speak to GM tomorrow, so you're just fine. What is it? What is it? Think about it for a moment. You know, be willing to share it. Let me tell you something. Transparency, and I am going to have you have another conversation. You're like, oh my God. Transparency is crucial in all of this. Transparency is the core to all behavior change. For me personally, and there's two reasons behind that. Number one, when you're transparent about something, it no longer lives in the embarrassing shadow side of your brain. In fact, I think it was one of the Supreme Court justices that said, light is the best disinfectant. And he was talking about something very different. But the idea here is that by bringing the things that we want to change out in the open, they lose control over us. It's my ability to stand here and say to you and share that background that I was embarrassed of in the past and that drove my behavior, drove my conflict avoidance. I diagnosed my issue around conflict avoidance by asking my people what it was that I could get better at. I also knew inherently some of the things that I was avoiding and dealing with, so I diagnosed an issue. I then put it out on the table, and I said to my staff, I said, in this year, and this was a couple of years ago, in this year, conflict avoidance is my thing to solve. I want to work hard at getting better, and I need your help. That transparency freed me. Just like when I was able to say to somebody, my dad's a steel worker, my mom's a cleaning lady. That transparency freed me from the insecurities that I had. We as individuals have to be able to share those things in order to be personally free of the things that yield over us. Then the second thing that we have to be able to do around transparency is, anybody read the New York Times article, I think it was on Monday, about the neurons and the mirror neurons that were found? Anybody see that article? Interesting article. Basically showed that empathy is a genetic trait, which now doesn't leave you off the hook to say, well, I just don't have that gene. Empathy is a genetic trait. And what they found is that people have to see behavior happen in front of them, even virtually, interestingly enough. It actually proved that over the phone or in video conference, etc., you're not as effective at empathizing as you are in person. But it showed that the triggering of the empathy neurons were solid when witnessed. When witnessed. What does that mean to us as leaders? It means, like what we've always said in the past, we've got to lead from example. If we expect people to share the things openly that they need to get better with, and we don't, that's not going to work. We as leaders have to be willing to be vulnerable, have to be willing to share with the people around us what we have to improve in order to make other people, encourage them, create that fertile environment, invite them to get better, invite them to be vulnerable, and let them know that's okay, because we are too. Come on. I mean, it's not rocket science. I know many of you may be sitting out there saying, yeah, I get it. But putting it into practice, holy cow. Institutionalizing this into your staff meetings, that's a chore. But it's doable. It's doable. What are yours? What are you going to make a commitment on? Think of it as a New Year's resolution. What little thing are you going to make a commitment to get better in 2006 in your leadership style? Go back to the same person you just talked to, not a new person. You know why? Because you're not supposed to walk up to somebody on the street that you've never met before and say, let me tell you about my insecurities. You have some foundation already of a relationship with somebody. You've just shared with them either your passion or you shared with them the aspiration of what kind of a leader you'd like to be. And by the way, I bet you there may be some commonalities between what you just shared in terms of aspiration and what you are now suggesting you're going to commit to getting better at in terms of a frailty. But it's a frailty. It's a vulnerability. Get over it. No big deal. You all have them. Go share it with somebody else. Go for it. Okay, take 30 seconds, 15 seconds. Come on back. Come on back.
Monongahela.
Hey,
W&J
fantastic.
and Pitt.
Oh, that's
So-
great. That's great.
well,
Latrobe.
Yeah, similar background, you know.
Oh, so many of us did, didn't it?
And
that's great.
I worked in Clariton Works at U.S. Steel in the summer. I was the security guard at Three Rivers.
Those days. I just want to get to the Super Bowl one more time. All right, come on back. Come on back. Yeah, it's getting harder and harder. I don't know if that means you hear the coffee break and scotch break calling, or if that means you're getting deeper and deeper in the relationship. But come on back. All right. Well, that was easy. That was easy. And I can't tell you how excited I am, because I know what this could be the start of for any of you as individuals, but for you as a group. You know, imagine trickling this back into your organizations. They're having a great time back there. Imagine. What's your name? What's your name? Jake. What's your name? No, it's Jake. I want to party with you. I'm sticking around. She's a Z, there's no question. I'm sticking around afterward. All right. So here's some suggestions, just as a wrap up. And then I'm going to tell a little story and we'll be done. Number one, there's a 5-stage process, which I've just taken you through to some extent, that I think really simply allows all of us as better leaders, and take this back to your organization and maybe try it on a little bit in your staff meetings. It doesn't even have to be done, in some big process, but just take these back. Number one, for anybody to go through personal leadership change and to get all of your folks to go through this, the first step is acceptance. You got to accept the fact that a personal commitment to growth, continuous growth, is crucial to you as leaders. Now, the best way to get that as an accepted norm within your organization is to behave like that in a way that engenders empathy, so that your organization will want to do the same. So number one is acceptance. Number two is diagnosis. You got to identify what the thing is that you want to change. And it doesn't matter, frankly. You don't have to pick the one. Just pick a one. Because the great news about this process, what I found for myself, is when I started down this path and I started diagnosing the things I needed to change, one thing after another, it just started opening up to me. And I became clearer about the things I needed to change. I created an environment around me where individuals were more capable of coming to me and telling me about the things that they thought were getting in my way of success. And it was a huge blessing to me. Once it started, it snowballs. It just snowballs. There's two ways to diagnose. One is through introspection. You started that process right here. The other way is through asking others. I promise you, if you ask your significant others what it is you can stop doing that's getting in your way of success, they will probably tell you something, all right? That's a start. The other thing you can do is ask your employees. We think about these 360-degree reviews as Big Brother looking out at us. That's not the way we should be thinking. We should be conducting a 360-degree review every time we walk around. When I walk off this stage, I say to my folks, what could I do better? What did I do wrong? What could I do different? Because I know that I got a long way to go before I'm the kind of person and I'm the kind of helper that I'd like to be. So how do I get better? Keep asking that question as often as possible. Diagnosis. Then transparency. You've got to have transparency to free yourself, And you've got to have transparency to signal to the rest of the organization that improvement is the norm and that it's okay to make mistakes because we're here to help each other be successful. Transparency. So that's 3. The 4th is feedback. Feeding feedback into the process and being open to it. So I said to one of my employees yesterday, I said, JP, I wanted to let you know, have you ever noticed about yourself that when you're talking and I'm trying to interrupt, you just keep going? You know, it's the most bizarre thing in the world. JP will start talking, he'll start talking, I'll say, what about it? And he'll just start, as if he totally is not hearing me, try to interrupt. At which point he says, well, I could say the same thing about you. I'm like, that's not the way to get feedback, JP. And so it's interesting. I let him sit with it. He called me back, and he said, you know what, I just picked up the phone when we were done. I called my wife. I asked her, and her only comment was, thank God. And I said, you mean your wife has never told you that you do this? He goes, no, I never realized I did it. I was like, oh my God. It's amazing. Literally, so it's one of those things that we've got to be willing to constantly ask those around us for how we can get better and build it into your process. The final one, number 5, is measurement. What I do is on some of these squishy things, which are difficult to measure, I create a scale of 0 to 5. And around conflict avoidance, let's say, I ask myself at every staff meeting, before the staff meeting, I say, okay, by the way, scarcity is the thing I'm working on this year. I have a scarcity mentality. And it has to do with how I invest resources, etc. I mean, to the point where, and it's funny because I thought about using this as a construct. I'm on a low carb push right now, and I get so afraid that my next meal will not have Splenda that I carry it with me. I mean, I didn't do this just for this, but I carry Splenda and I hoard it. I also hoard other condiments like mustard because I'm afraid. So I capture this stuff and I put it in my pocket, in my bags. Sometimes soy sauce is the other one. I did not grow up in the Depression, but I act like it. It's very strange. So I have this hoarding scarcity mentality, and I've got these guys, my head of training and development, Peter, they're constantly now making fun of me, and it's forcing me to at least be aware of what I'm doing. So scarcity mentality is mine for the year, so I go into the meetings and I say, okay, I want to be able to give better feedback, and on my personal scorecard, I give myself a score in front of my staff meeting. I said, this month I think I did a 4. And then I pause and I say, any feedback? And I open up myself for people to give me feedback in the staff meeting of whether I've done a 4 or not, and what experiences they can point to that either complements or contradicts the measurement that I have for myself. So remember, aspiration, diagnosis, transparency, feedback, measurement. Simple things that we can all do to get better. Simple things that we can all do to help our organizations be more effective. I know this isn't easy. I'll just end with a quick story. And it's one that I told down at the CIO conference, and I know that it resonated. I had a quick conversation with Bill about it. This takes a step out on the edge. Not a big one, but a little one. And sometimes you need the courage to muster, to be able to do some of these things, be a little bit more vulnerable, walk across the room and talk to somebody at a conference you haven't talked about engaging conversations that are deeper and more intimate than the typical conversation. And with that in mind, I give you, for instance, I was speaking in Radio City Music Hall not long ago, and 5,000 people, blew me away. And right before me was Rudy Giuliani. Right after me was Colin Powell. After him was Jack Welch. And it went on. And I sat there in the green room thinking like I had just driven up in a beat-up Green Nova with rust spots. About all of those old insecurities came flowing over me like you can't imagine. And I went back and I grabbed the following story. When I was about 8 years old, driving down with my dad on the way home, it was November, coming up on Christmas, and we had been unemployed for 6 months. I grew up in Pittsburgh in the 70s. And this was a pretty challenging time. My dad had been unemployed for 6 months, which at Kennametal at the time meant that he was being hired. He had had 15 years of time, but he was going to be hired back at this stage. Even if he did get hired back, which we didn't know, he'd be hired back as a new man. He'd lost his 15 years of time. That was a rule at that time. So it was a pretty tough time coming up on Christmas. One of the things I'd wanted was a big wheel. And I'm standing there, and my dad saw a big wheel in someone's trash along the side of the road. He didn't even think twice. He pulled the car off the side of the road, and he got out of the car, and he walked up the sidewalk to knock on the door to ask whether he could have that big wheel. I got to tell you, 55-year-old man about this tall, balding, kind of like me. I'm getting there. And I promise you, that man had lots of things going on in his head. Fears, pride, insecurity, worried about his son seeing him picking up trash along the side of the road for a Christmas present. Probably didn't help that his son was hiding in the backseat of a car. Worried that one of my buddies would go by and see. My dad fought all of that, knocked on the door. Now, I learned a lesson early on. My dad used to tell me all the time, don't be ever afraid to ask. The worst anybody could ever say is no. So audacity was kind of drilled into me from an early age. That's not what surprised me at this stage, at this story. What surprised me was how that woman acted and reacted. She was excited. She was thankful. She said, of course you can have the big wheel. Not only can you have the big wheel, but I've got like tons of stuff, in the garage that we have been cleaning up. My grandkids have moved away. We've got a couple bikes. We've got a go-kart. We've got a swing set. Can you use that stuff? We didn't have the heart to throw it away. I had the best Christmas. All of a sudden, my little head's poking up from behind the seat. Wasn't worried about embarrassment anymore. You know what? You all have people around you that, like that woman, would get so much joy from making you more of a success. All you got to do is lower your guards and let them in. You've got people you don't even know who, if you start to build the kind of relationships over here and moving those relationships from there to there, they're customers, they're employees, they're bosses, they're peers. With deeper intimacy, simple lowering your guards, willing to be a little bit more vulnerable, the joy in your life and the success in your life will be so much more significant. And I hope today you take some of this stuff, sprinkle it back on your organizations, honor the commitment you've just made to yourself for one little incremental change, and have some of that success, but more importantly, have some of that joy in your lives. Thank you very much.